Former Vice President Joe Biden, a candidate for president in the election that's just 8 days away, firmly supports abortion on demand from conception right to the moment of birth, as do his running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, and the Democratic Party platform. Nonetheless, early this month, a group of self-professed evangelicals released a statement, Pro-Life Evangelicals for Biden, arguing that a vote for Biden would be more pro-life than a vote for President Donald Trump, who, with Vice President Mike Pence and the Republican Party platform, are working to restrict and ultimately ban abortion in America. Tonight on From the Stacks, veteran pro-life leader Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, a nationwide network of pro-life organizations representing more than 837,000 Americans, and national co-chair of the Pro-Life Voters for Trump Coalition, joins us to evaluate that statement. Stay tuned and invite your friends to join.
Good evening. I'm Cal Beisner. I'm the founder and national spokesman of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Welcome to what I think is going to be a really exciting program this evening. The Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation is a network of just under 70 evangelical scholars. Roughly a third are natural scientists, a third are economists and policy wonks, and a third are theologians, pastors, and other religious leaders. And we serve a mission of educating the public and policymakers on three things simultaneously and interwoven. Biblical earth stewardship, our answer to environmentalism, which we take to mean working together to enhance the fruitfulness, the beauty, and the safety of the earth to the glory of God and the benefit of our neighbors. Second is economic development for the very poor around the world. And the third, and the most important, is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news that sinners like me can be reconciled to the holy God by grace alone, through faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone, who on the cross paid for my sins and rose from the dead in victory over death and judgment. These things are precious to our hearts, and we work hard to promote them all in the work of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. You can learn more about us at cornwallalliance.org. The Cornwall Alliance every month gives a special gift to donors of literally any size donation. Doesn't matter how small. Of course, we would appreciate it if it were generous. But every month we give a special gift. And this month, the gift is, how does the creation care movement threaten the pro-life movement? This book arose out of the problem that some creation care organizations were trying to apply the pro-life label to themselves, despite the fact that there are some enormous ethical and practical distinctions between what they do and the true pro-life movement, and that will be a major part of our topic this evening. To request your copy, all you need to do is go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, fill out the donation form, make your donation of literally any size, and in the comments field, ask for the book, How Does the Creation Care Movement Threaten the Pro-Life Movement? Or in fact, if you just simply write in pro-life, we'll know what you're talking about, and we will send it to you completely free.
I'm Megan Kennard, Director of Operations and Communications for the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Welcome to From the Stacks, a weekly live stream discussion. If you have questions for us during the show, write them in the comments box of the live stream on the Cornwall Facebook page, and we'll do our best to answer them before the end of the show. We would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment and invite your friends to watch tonight's show with you. Tonight's guest, Marjorie Dannenfelser, is president of Susan B. Anthony List. Over the last 3 election cycles, SBA List and its super PAC, Women Speak Out, have reached more than 4.6 million voters by visiting them at their homes to win a pro-life White House and secure a pro-life majority in the U.S. Senate. In January 2020, Mrs. Dannenfelser was named national co-chair of the Pro-Life Voices for Trump Coalition, a role she also held during the 2016 campaign after securing 4 groundbreaking pro-life commitments from the nominee. Marjorie is the author of Life is Winning: Inside the Fight for Unborn Children and Their Mothers. She's been published widely, including in Time, The Washington Post, and National Review, and profiled by New York Magazine, The Telegraph, The New Yorker, and The Washington Post. She serves on the boards of the Alliance Defending Freedom and Life Perspectives Task Force, and was appointed to the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission by Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. She was named one of Politico's magazine's top 50 influencers of 2018, Washington Examiner's top 10 political women on the move, Newsmax's top 25 most influential Republican women, and Newsweek's top 10 leaders of the Christian right. An alumna of Duke University, she and her husband Marty live in Arlington, Virginia, and have 5 children. Marjorie, thank you for taking the time out of your hectic schedule, especially right now as we're zeroing in on the election, to join us on From the Stacks. Welcome.
What a privilege it is for me. It's a moment of renewal that will be really important in this last furlong of the race to the election, Thank you.
Well, before we dig into tonight's topic, could you tell us a bit about yourself and particularly when and why you became so heavily involved in the pro-life movement?
Well, one of the reasons that I love this particular program is that it's really oriented towards why I became pro-life, why I converted to the pro-life cause. The intellectual argument for the pro-life cause came new to me when I was at Duke University. I came in as a pre-med student, thought I was clear on my path forward, and was a very ardent college Republican chairman, very pro-choice. And my mind changed because of the liberal arts, because of the taking the liberal arts seriously, and loving that. I became a philosophy major at the end of my time there. It was a few short years, like everyone who was in college, and everyone who's in college thinks it's the most important years of their life, and in some ways it was for me. I really was required to confront my shallow convictions, like my body, my choice. Went to DC, met a lot of people, believers who believed, who had grounding in a really, truly, authentically pro-life conviction that were very different from my Eastern North Carolina upbringing, and my mind changed in a big way. And I just would add that while politics was in my blood, I acknowledge that all along the way that it wasn't the most beautiful of tasks, and especially for the intellectual life. But I really believed that it was the most particular and important thing that our founders pointed to when there was a great human rights injustice that needed addressing in our nation. They set up a system and gave us the tools to address it. And therefore, I decided to work on the political piece of this and try to build at the center of the pro-life movement a really muscular pro-life arm. And that's been the work of my life and the work of my team's life and my family's life for quite a number of years.
Thank you, Marjorie. Your latest book, Life is Winning, which we saw a picture of a moment ago, and there we go, got another one up. Life is Winning: Inside the Fight for Unborn Children and Their Mothers. That just came out in August. Tell us a bit more about it. And is the pro-life cause really winning in America? How do we know? What are the various signs of that?
Yeah, so this is a different kind of a book. It really is just a series of stories that really answer your question. Life is winning in America because we took this cause seriously. If this is the death of a child every single day, times thousands, and that it's been the buildup of the death of so many boys and girls who are intended for this world, that for purposes that only he or she in each particular situation, only he or she could fulfill that purpose. And then this is the biggest human rights disaster that humankind has ever experienced, and definitely in the United States. in our American history, and we are uniquely set up to address that cause. This book just basically puts that premise to the test. Is that true? Is it true that that you could take a cause this fundamental and take it to and align it with the tools of American democracy, take it into campaigns, take it to the American people, take it to the constitutional republic that we have, and fix it in the way that Dred Scott was fixed, in the way that child labor laws were fixed, in the way that civil rights laws all across the board were fixed. And I think that we're seeing that that is true. And honestly, that it wasn't alien to the founders that it takes just a raw political muscle at the middle of that movement to convince politicians that we're serious. So you bring up the organic movement that this is, that's in the hearts and minds of every outlier and inlier place in America, and you bring that all together to a force that elects and unelects people based on whether they are true to the pro-life cause or not, and you make it work, like guns, like labor, like all the other movements that work.
Well, last Friday, the Trump administration announced that the United States and 31 other nations had joined in signing the Geneva Consensus Declaration. I think that's a tremendously historic step. The Geneva Consensus Declaration states, among other things, that, quote, "There is no international right to abortion, nor any international obligation on the part of states to finance or facilitate abortion." And it adds, "In no case should abortion be promoted as a method of family planning, and the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state." And my final quote from it is, "Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance." That's, I just find that really amazing language, especially on the international stage. The Declaration's 7 co-sponsors were the United States, Brazil, Egypt, Hungary, Indonesia, and Uganda, and then another 24 countries so far have signed on. Well, what does that say about President Trump's and his administration's commitment to protecting the unborn, not only in America, but also around the world?
I think it points to a very simple test. And that is that, could it be possible that the right thing to do is also the politically smart thing to do? And the politically smart thing to do, which is the right thing to do, is either provincial in terms of it being smart, or it's universal because it's reflective of natural law, because it's reflective of eternal law. And I think that it's like your mom said to you when you're growing up, you speak the truth and it will be the universal law, right? That was Emerson, who didn't get everything right, but he got that thing right. And so, and because this administration has been emboldened to do the right thing, because it became the politically smart thing in a very organic way in this country, it has been emboldened to be who they are, to speak their voice, to be the universal truth that others will align to. And it took a lot of courage. And frankly, this administration has a lot of more courage along those lines than other administrations that people expected would be far more pro-life and far more aggressive in their actions than this one. And this one has outstripped all the others. I mean, the funny thing is, the document that you just read has almost been 100% underreported. I say almost because maybe it's 99% underreported. It is a moment of incredible universal impact. It's a communication to speak to the world about who we are as planet's Earth inhabitants. So I think it just says everything about who this administration is, and particularly who he chose. This president chose Secretary Pompeo, who could not be more authentic in his evangelical and pro-life convictions. And this is what that means. This is what he did.
Well, this is on the global scene. How about here in America? Since President Trump took office, what has he done to help the pro-life movement here to protect unborn babies?
Well, it's been thoroughgoing in every single department that you can imagine. But I'll tell you that when he was running, I had great doubt when he was in his primary. And when the whole primary was culminating, when we had gotten every single primary candidate to commit to certain things, we were still worried about this man, who was one of 17 candidates who had risen to the first among 17 primary candidates in the Republican Party. Who is this playboy Manhattan financier that has got all this news around him? How do we pin him down? He says he's pro-life. I'm a convert. He's a convert. And the job of helping a convert is you help them be the person they say they are. So what we did, and what I think everyone should do, is exact and ask for commitments. We asked for these commitments, and they were even bolder than what we asked for. And he did every single one of them. So on the domestic front, it was fighting the most important thing beyond all of the things, was committing to appoint only pro-life Supreme Court justices, and every other federal judge had to be pro-life. That is a legacy gift. That is a legacy commitment that he committed to and made better, even in his own words. I mean, he literally wrote these commitments down in a letter to me so that we could use this as a way to hold him accountable. The next thing was defunding Planned Parenthood, which we have made progress with, but it is difficult beyond the executive branch. That we've got to have a legislative branch that cooperates. But he's done every single thing that he can do in that regard. That we would that he would pass 20-week pain capable bill, just a national law that would outlaw abortion after 20 weeks. He again has done everything he could do to lobby and ask for that bill and make and implore the Congress to get it to him. The filibuster, the 2/3 vote in the Senate has been a constant problem in all these things. And then the Hyde Amendment, to make that permanent in all law, that we will never again fund abortion in the law. So those are the commitments that he made. Those are the domestic commitments that he made. But I just want to say that after he was elected, that all of the commitments that he made were just those were just the minimum bar. He immediately put every single pro-life person that we thought was qualified to be heading departments, the staffing of departments at the highest levels, at the White House and at HHS and the State Department, and a thoroughgoing pro-life administration like no other in history, because it is the beating heart of this administration. It just is. It's who they are, unlike any other administration that was.
Yeah. Well, in contrast, Vice President Biden and running mate Senator Kamala Harris are solid supporters, as is, of course, the whole Democratic Party platform, of abortion on demand from conception to the moment of natural birth, and in some states, even for a little while after that. During one of the Democratic primary debates, and I think we have a clip of this, in the summer of 2019, pressed on the issue by then rival Harris, Biden said, "I support a woman's right to choose. It's a constitutional right. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I will, in fact, move as president to see to it that the Congress legislates that is the law." I think we can actually see him doing that.
Talk about now running for president and you change your position on the Hyde Amendment.
Senator Kamala Harris questions the former vice president about his flip-flop on the Hyde Amendment. It stops federal taxpayer dollars from paying for most abortions. Catholic Joe Biden supported that until just last month.
I support a woman's right to choose. I support it's a constitutional right. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I will, in fact, move as president to see to that the Congress legislates that is the law.
Yeah, and Biden also calls for the repeal of the Hyde Amendment. Marjorie, what would you expect from a Biden-Harris administration on abortion?
Well, I think it's there's some of it is straightforward, and some of it is not necessarily. He has over a 30-year period of time gone from being somebody who said he was a pro-life Democrat, backing up the Hyde Amendment, meaning blocking, the ability for the government to tax us so that we spend our own money to fund the abortion procedure, to returning that, to basically flip-flopping on every single pro-life position that he staked out early on. He knew that he had to be that person early on because he believed that he was the cultural bellwether of where he came from. And now, because things have changed culturally, he's changed culturally. His party has changed culturally. There were many pro-life Democrats a long time ago. They're not now. And so he's followed that. So his heart has followed his ability to leverage his own political life. He has completely changed. And the other thing that we can expect from him, so we can expect that all of these things that we're talking about, especially if we lose the presidency and the Senate, we can expect that what will happen immediately is that we will see all of the pro-life protections that we've worked so hard to get into law will be overturned right away. That they will be, because they will overturn the legislative filibuster rule. All they need is a majority in the Senate, which is not the situation now. They'll overturn that. They'll overturn the Hyde Amendment. We know this is true. This is not just histrionics. They will make sure, most importantly, that we're able to stack the court. That this Amy Coney Barrett, beautiful moment, will be completely wiped out because they will be able to change the number of seats on the Supreme Court to suit a legislative fix that they would like to address. They'll put permanently into law what we know that Roe versus Wade is. So the stakes cannot be higher. It is the most important election, hands down, ever in our lifetime. And it's the difference between millions of lives saved and millions of lives lost.
Yeah. Yeah, Marjorie, you just mentioned the fact that if Biden and Harris win, they are likely to stack the court. That is, add a bunch of new members, new justices to the Supreme Court, all of them appointed along ideological lines, in order to get rid of the strong constitutionalist, originalist, textualist majority that now is on the court. And those terms, by the way, those are not policy terms. Those are rule of law terms. Those are, you take the Constitution for what it means. You don't, wiggle your way around it. So they're saying, we understand that they're going to stack the court. They were trying to say that Trump was trying to stack the court simply by appointing a successor to a justice who had retired from or rather died in office. That's not stacking the court. And that, by the way, is an example of how the left consistently, as I put it, left and theft rhyme really well together for good reasons. And one of the things that they steal is vocabulary. In that case, they're stealing the meaning of stack the court. They're applying it to something to which it does not properly apply. In tonight's conversation, we're going to be talking about how they also steal the term pro-life. So that brings us to that main topic of tonight's conversation, the pro-life evangelicals for Biden statement. Prime movers behind that statement seem to have been Richard Mao, President Emeritus of Fuller Theological Seminary, and Ronald J. Sider, President Emeritus of Evangelicals for Social Action, and author of a book that a few years ago Christianity Today magazine called the most influential evangelical book of the last 50 years. A book that, by the way, sparked my initial interest in biblical economics, and to which I responded quite critically in my own book, Prosperity and Poverty, The Compassionate Use of Resources in a World of Scarcity, which is available through Cornwall Alliance's online store. Now, most of the lead signers of pro-life evangelicals for Biden would not be household names for most evangelicals. The better known ones include Richard Foster, author of Celebration of Discipline, Roberta Hestonese, former president of Eastern University, Myron Augsburger, president emeritus of Eastern Mennonite University, and John Perkins. Now, some people will be surprised to find that Billy Graham's granddaughter, Jerusha Duford, has signed, as have Christianity Today Emeritus Board Chair John Huffman. As of last Friday, the website's list of signers from the general public ran to nearly 7,500. Let me just read the opening of the pro-life evangelicals for Biden statement. Quote, as pro-life evangelicals, we disagree with Vice President Biden and the Democratic platform on the issue of abortion, but we believe a biblically shaped commitment to the sanctity of human life compels us to a consistent ethic of life that affirms the sanctity of human life from beginning to end. Now, Mrs. Dannenfelser, as a veteran pro-life leader, what's your initial reaction to that opening? What's wrong with insisting on a consistent ethic of life that affirms the sanctity of life from beginning to end?
Well, it actually begins with your Orwellian example of court packing. You get to change the definition of words to fit what your meaning is. So in the court packing example that you just gave, court packing becomes something that is a completely legitimate thing to in the Trump narrative and the Trump example, we get to fill court seats that are empty. That's a constitutional, not only a prerogative, but an obligation. Court packing otherwise is something that means we change the nature of the Constitution. We change the nature of powers. Okay, we change the balance of powers. Same for the definition of what pro-life is. You change the definition of what that is, then it becomes everything that anybody could ever want. Because life becomes this beautiful affirmative thing. It's like this big Where is Waldo picture where you're not even sure what it even means anymore. You can't pick out where abortion is in the big picture because everything is a pro-life because everyone loves life thing. But I think you've said before too that if you look up in even the Webster dictionary what pro-life means, it's understood to be an objection to abortion. And the reason that we chose that people that came before us chose that way of looking at it, they didn't say anti-abortion, they said pro-life, because they saw that this was the font of every other life, of every other value. Every other value and every other human right that you have it comes from the font of the fundamental right to live and breathe.
Something happened on the internet at any rate, but thanks for sticking with us, all of you. As we wait for Marjorie Dannenfelser to rejoin us, one point I would make is that the choice of the word kill by these so-called pro-life evangelicals for Biden, when they say that poverty, lack of health care, smoking, racism, and climate change kill, that choice of the word kill to describe what those things do is going to lead quietly to real confusion. In grammar, kill is what is called a transitive verb. This is, I'm a professional editor by background, so you have to forgive me these things, little nerdy things here. A transitive verb denotes an action by a subject on an object, what in grammar is called a direct object. Think back to your, 6th or 7th grade grammar lessons. It means there's someone who does the killing and someone else who gets killed. But in poverty, lack of health care, smoking, and climate change, you can't really identify a subject who kills. It would seem more appropriate to say that sometimes, not always, and that's another important distinction that we'll come to later, people die of those things. And die is what's called an intransitive verb, which, unlike a transitive verb, has no direct object. If I say John killed the bear, John's the subject, killed is the transitive verb, and bear is the direct object that receives the action of the verb. But in Cheryl died of poverty, Cheryl's the subject and died is the intransitive verb. The action is limited to Cheryl herself. Cheryl isn't the object, the target, so to speak, of some other subject. So people may die of poverty, lack of health care, et cetera, but at least ordinarily that doesn't mean someone killed them. And that's just that's not just an important grammatical distinction. It's also an important ethical, moral distinction, isn't it? Marjorie, welcome back.
So, Kellen, I just want to add on to what you were just saying. I'm sorry I got technically dropped somehow. Maybe God just knew that you needed to speak in that moment. But yes, so there are many prudential judgments around other things that affect life in terms of poverty. How do we address poverty? There are prudential judgments. We have to make a lot of decisions about how we address poverty and suffering, how we address domestic violence. How do we do that? And those are prudential judgments. We think about each piece of a policy initiative and we think about how do we do that. But that is a group of decisions. There is one decision in an abortion, and that is to kill or not kill.
Yeah.
And it's just that simple. I mean, honestly, and we all are, everybody listening here is very well educated, and we all studied things that we think are applicable to this, but it is a very simple thing. It's not a prudent, and the question about whether it's a prudential judgment or not hinges on whether this is death or not. If it's the death of a child, then this is the most important human rights movement that ever was in this time. If it's not the death of a child, it's the stupidest movement that ever was. It makes no sense. It's like you're telling people they shouldn't have an appendectomy or tonsillectomy. But that is not the premise of this movement. And so that is the fundamental premise that has to be examined, whether it's true or not true. And from it, every other argument comes.
You know, what's interesting, if people who are pro-life believe it's a baby, which we do, you have people who are pro-life evangelicals for Biden, and then they list things like smoking as a pro-life issue. And to correlate smoking, which is a choice by someone who gets to make that choice, with the death of another human being who doesn't get a choice is really mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. Megan, it's the difference between living and quality of life living issues. So once you're here, you get to make a bunch of decisions about whether your life is full of quality or not, whether your health is benefited or not. But the fundamental choice about whether you get to live or die, whether you are, I mean, I hate to be brutal, but whether you are mutilated as a little girl moments before birth, or a little boy moments before birth, or even a few months before birth, those are two very different decisions. Whether you smoke or whether you are mutilated before birth, or obviously there's a hierarchy of morality. There's a hierarchy of human rights involved in this. And getting it right is what churches do, at least, and honestly, authentic atheists do as well. Getting the hierarchy of values right is important, and it's what voters should do as well. And that's why it matters right now. So if we think that it's the death of a child, or we think it maybe is the death of a child, then we need to put it in the right place in the hierarchy of how we think, vote, and act. And honestly, this I think dishonest dealing because of people who hate this president or hate certain politicians who advocate for the pro-life cause is one of the one of the most dishonest moments I think we've lived in so long.
Yeah.
That the most anti-intellectual arguments, anti-theological, anti-moral, not amoral arguments being made, that somehow, as you said, Megan, that somehow smoking or housing or health care after you're born is equivalent to whether you get to be born or not. It's just silly. It doesn't make any
ridiculous.
sense. It's ridiculous.
It is.
Marjorie,
it's just mind-blowing.
This is an issue that came up about a decade ago when various creation care groups, especially one called the Evangelical Environmental Network, began portraying efforts to reduce mercury pollution from coal-fired power plants on the badly mistaken grounds that they seriously threatened unborn children's health. They did not. They started trying to promote that as a pro-life issue. And in 2012, Marjorie, you and about 30 other pro-life leaders all signed a joint statement called Protecting the Unborn and the Pro-Life Movement from a Misleading Environmentalist Tactic. That statement rejected that portrayal as, quote, disingenuous and dangerous to our efforts to protect the lives of unborn children, adding, the life in pro-life denotes not quality of life, but life itself. The term denotes opposition to a procedure that intentionally results in dead babies. 2 years later, after the Evangelical Environmental Network refused to change its rhetoric, additional pro-life leaders signed a new statement reiterating the point of the earlier one, and again calling on EEN and other so-called creation care organizations using the same tactic to cease. Were those pro-life leaders just defending their turf, trying to keep from losing financial support? Why were they so adamant? Why were you so adamant, Marjorie, that opposition to climate change or air pollution wasn't really pro-life?
Oh my gosh. It's just, sometimes I want to stutter, but I understand. I used to be very pro-choice, and so I understand not getting it. What I have a hard time with is people who say they get it. People who say they believe this is the death of a little boy or a little girl intended for this world with a specific purpose that only he or she can work out in this world. And they're dying at the rate of, over 2,000 a day. And that somehow that is the equivalent to mercury poisoning in the climate. I'm sorry, I'm not getting the right terms, perhaps, but
you got it.
That somehow this is the equivalent, the death, and they would never say that if they were the death of a young man on a battlefield. They would never say that, and it's because because the difference in their age, the difference in their geography in the womb versus on a battlefield, they would never say that. And I think the difference is also because in the Catholic Church, abortion is defined as it is stated to be an intrinsic evil. It is intrinsically evil by its act and itself. It is an evil. It can never be. There may be reasons that it happened, and the mother may have reasons, but it is in itself still an intrinsic evil, and she needs help, and the culture needs help to fight against its intrinsic evil. But you can't say that about a lot of other bad things that are happening in the world. That, is it intrinsically evil that we put gas in our car to get our cars going with fossil fuels? No, I don't think it's intrinsic. We know that it's not, because these are prudential judgments. They involved a lot of decision makings. They involve a lot of pieces of policy. So what I find very, very difficult is that people of faith would say that it's not pro-life, that my pro-life position can be used to support a platform that supports abortion. In other words, to put a point to it, a candidate who is actively for abortion up until birth, and we finance it, as long as they're for the climate, for positive climate policies from their perspective, that's okay. It's the world turned upside down. It makes no sense.
And if I may quickly just mention this too, by the way, you mentioned that for the Roman Catholic Church, abortion is intrinsically evil. That is the nearly unanimous position of all major theologians in the theology of ethics in the evangelical movement as well. I mean, just to give you one example, here is not a small book. This is Dr. Wayne Grudem's Christian Ethics. It's a little bit large. And Wayne, yeah, a little over 1,200 pages. And Wayne has been a member of the board of advisors for the Cornwall Alliance since we started. Wayne Grudem, one of the most famous evangelical theologians in the world right now, he takes that position very, very clearly, that abortion simply is intrinsically evil.
And every modern pope has said the same thing, that it's an issue at the heart of the church. And I'll just say to you, I'm Catholic. I'm a convert to Catholicism, and very much in sympathy and empathy with the evangelical movement. I consider myself an evangelical Catholic. So when I was at Mass just recently, allowed to go in Arlington, Virginia, the homily was on how abortion is intrinsically evil, and how that should affect your vote. And I will just say to you also, friends and family didn't like that because the same disconnect that we're talking about. So I think it's important to think about, why is that happening? So people say that they're pro-life. They don't really mean it. Like they are pro-life, but do they really think this is the death of a child, a little boy or a girl who was intended for the world, or do they not? And I don't mean that we punish people because they don't get it, but I think they believe it, and perhaps they don't. I think that they're not quite there. When they see this as a prudential judgment, like, yes, this is one issue among many that really matter, just like climate matters and others matter. That perhaps they don't believe that this is the death, like a death of any of us here, any one of us three. They can't believe it yet. I just don't think they can.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go to a quick video of Marjorie's book, and then we're going to take questions from Facebook, and then we'll continue on with our discussion.
All of the beautiful flourishing of the pro-life movement is coming to a point. Many fantastic pro-life pieces of legislation passing all over the country, and a pro-life president that has had a stronger impact than any president since Roe versus Wade. The consequence of this new beginning will be to save the lives of unborn girls and boys sent into this world for a particular purpose that only he or she could achieve. When the prize is that sweet, we can't falter.
Well, Marjorie, we have a question on Facebook wanting to know specifically how to reach someone who is not a Christian with the pro-life message? If you can't use religion, you had mentioned that there are a number of pro-life atheists out there. How can people reach atheists or agnostics or maybe someone who sort of believes in God but not a Christian?
Well, for me, there are two things I want to say about that. One is that for me, that's what I believe that I came around. I think it was the Holy Spirit was forming around me all the time, but I believe that I came around because of arguments from philosophy and logic and the good example of people who believed this position. So I think that is true. Arguing from science, arguing from logical philosophy. My premise was my body, my choice. I thought I was the smartest person in the world, and that's the dumbest argument that you could ever make. Like, we're obviously arguing there are two people here. So either say it's not two people or not. But that's the argument that we have. But the other thing is more important in my mind. My mind changed. I thought I was the smartest person in the world, and I needed those arguments, yes. But I really needed the example of the really beautiful, kind, and smart people around me. Not just what they were saying, but who they were. They did not judge me. They really were vested in bringing me over. I was really adamant. Like, I was not shrinking violet. And they were they didn't give up. They were kind, non-judgmental. They just took me on. And generally it wasn't on the faith. It was about, what is this thing that we're talking about?
Yeah.
What is the goal, the object of an abortion? That's the most important question you can ask somebody. What happens? And walking through that whole thing.
That's a great question. I'm going to use that next time. What's the object of an abortion? That's really good. Well, Cal, a few years ago, you wrote the booklet, How Does the Creation Care Movement Threaten the Pro-Life Movement? And I should remind our viewers that we'll send a free copy of that as our thanks when you give a 100% tax-deductible donation of any size to the Cornwall Alliance. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. To request a copy, you can just go to the Cornwall Alliance website, which is cornwallalliance.org. You can click on the donate button. And in the comments box, which is on the second page of the form, just write pro-life and we'll send it to you. But Cal, more recently, you've written a couple of articles, one in Christian Post and another in Patriot Post, in which you've called this new statement a monumental moral failure. That's pretty strong language. Why do you, with your background as a seminary professor of ethics, think that?
Well, for three reasons. First, pro-life Evangelicals for Biden hides a fundamental ethical distinction between intentional harm and unintentional harm. In every successful abortion, you intentionally kill a human being. That makes it very, very different from someone dying in an auto accident. It makes it different from someone dying of cancer developed through smoking. Makes it different from someone dying as a result of air pollution or water pollution. There's no intention there to kill. And the Bible itself makes a very important distinction between intentional harm and unintentional harm. Second, the pro-life Evangelicals for Biden statement hides the distinction, again, in biblical ethics, between killing and all lesser harms. Murder is the one and only sin, crime, that in the Bible is treated as one for which no substitute, no ransom is permitted for the capital punishment that is prescribed. Now, whether people today believe in capital punishment or not, if they want to think in terms of biblical ethics, the Bible distinguishes between killing and all lesser crimes in a very important way. And the reason for that, of course, is that when someone kills another human being, that person is essentially attacking God in effigy. We get that from the language of Genesis 9:6, which says, "Whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man." So it misses those two basic ethical distinctions. I mean, this is not high-level ethics. This is Ethics 101, Unit 1, the kind of thing that you would learn that early in a course. And then third, as we've already suggested, the statement misuses the term pro-life. It does it quite deceptively, trying to apply it to issues that simply are not analogous by a long shot with abortion.
Marjorie, have you had a chance to read Cal's articles? What did you think of his points or the points that he just made? How important are they?
Yeah, they are. I was just thinking and nodding and thinking how important they are, because they're so applicable to the specific moment that we're in, the specific urgent moment that we're in. That if you're a person of faith, there are people that have no faith, and I think they can still come to the same conclusion. But if you are a person of faith and you're looking for what should be your bellwether of how you would vote, your North Star, God himself, his creation, what are the first things that he did? I don't know how you get a better barometer about how you vote than what Cal just said. That be your guide of conscience, that be your conscience, the prick of your conscience, and how you think about who you vote for, you thinking about what they think. And I think we've gotten to a place in this country where to comment on that, people say, oh, as long as it gets to, like voting, well, you can't even. No, that was never the way it was from the founding. Your moral compass is exactly the place you go to figure out who you should vote for. So this quote from Mother Teresa that I just always go to, and if we accept that a mother can kill even her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill another? She's saying
Absolutely.
the obvious, but she's also saying, how can you understand any moral law beyond the killing, any moral law beyond abortion, if you can't accept, if you believe it's a death and you say that it's not? How can you even understand? And you say that can't be your voting, a guide for your voting. How can you then understand the relationship between mother and child, or father and child, in child abuse? It so stems from the fundamental right to life. If you don't understand the tenderness that a mother has for her child and our obligation to that, then it's very difficult to understand a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Cal, can you give us some biblical support for your first 2 points, the distinctions between intentional and unintentional harm and between killing and lesser harms?
Yeah, sure. Let's start with intentionality. In discussing the cities of refuge to which Israelites could flee for protection from the kinsman redeemer or avenger of blood of someone who had been killed, Deuteronomy 19 says, and I'm quoting here, "This is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live. When he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously, as when a man goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of blood pursue the manslayer in the heat of his anger and overtake him, because the way is long, and take his life, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated him previously." But it then adds, "But if there is a man who hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and rises up against him and strikes him so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, then the elders of his city shall send and take him from there and deliver him into the hand of the avenger of blood, that he may die." Likewise, Exodus 21 says, "He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which he may flee. If, however, a man acts presumptuously toward his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar, that he may die." We make similar distinctions now in our law when we speak of first, second, and third degree murder, or of the difference between murder and manslaughter. Real quickly here, Megan, I know you would like me to move on to the other distinction, but I notice we're getting pretty close to 7 o'clock. Marjorie, can you stay with us for another 15 to 20 minutes?
Yes, I would love that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so let me just quickly also make that biblical distinction between killing and other harm. The Bible is clear on that. We've already seen that the Bible prescribes capital punishment for what we today would call first-degree murder, but it prescribes lesser penalties for crimes against property or for assaults that injure but don't kill. Exodus 22 prescribes penalties for theft, restoring what was stolen, plus 2, 4, even 5 times as much, depending on the circumstances. There are plenty of other examples. Killing is a far more serious sin and crime than theft or even injurious but non-lethal assault in biblical ethics.
That's interesting, Cal. Marjorie, one of Cal's criticisms of pro-life evangelicals for Biden is that, as he puts it, they claim the term pro-life deceptively. He points to standard dictionary definitions that link the term specifically to opposition to abortion. But in 1 Timothy 6, Paul warns against people who have, quote, a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words, out of which arise envy, strife, abusive language, evil suspicions. And in 2 Timothy 2:14, Paul instructs Timothy to remind believers not to wrangle about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers. What do you think? Is Cal just engaged in useless wrangling about words, or does he have a point? What does it matter whether we call concerns about poverty, climate change, racism, smoking, and lack of adequate health care pro-life? How does it affect the pro-life movement specifically as defined by opposition to abortion?
What an incredible question, and what a great example that Scripture always predicts what man will do, and no matter what political or social or cultural environment that he's in through all the ages. And yes, the language is being manipulated now in so many ways. But maybe when we find language manipulated, we just abandon it in some ways. Now, it's difficult to do that in this current culture, to say, let's just don't forget about saying the word pro-life and let's just talk about what we're talking about. But I think it sometimes is important too. So I think the use of the word pro-life to apply to all the other things that are matters of prudential judgment, where fair people can disagree on policy matters, is the difference of the difference is there's a singular act in abortion. And the singular act leads to the death of one person. Each one leads to the death of one human being. All the other issues that you mentioned that are quality of life issues are an amalgam of a lot of decision making, and there is a balance of concerns that are being taken into legislatures, into consciences, and intellectual life. How do we solve these things? I think that what happens right now, what is happening in the evangelical world, is that there's a great hatred, and I'm just going to use that word, hatred for this president. And they're looking for a reason that they can avoid supporting him, and they're having a really hard time getting around how they describe how they think that abortion is now not a big deal. They say things like Roe versus Wade, no big deal if it gets overturned. It's just such a ridiculous argument. And so they're really grasping. I think that's actually what's happening. I know we're not here to have a political argument, but I think that's where Orwellian terms come from sometimes. People force into a moment that they need to explain why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, Cal, as a scholar in economics who's written an introductory textbook on economics from the perspective of biblical worldview, theology, and ethics, what do you think of the claim by pro-life evangelicals for Biden that, and this is a quote, a number of Democratic proposals that would significantly alleviate that financial burden, accessible health services for all citizens, affordable childcare, a minimum wage that lifts workers out of poverty, and that therefore On balance, Joe Biden's policies are more consistent with the biblically shaped ethic of life than those of Donald Trump. And I will also point out, I'm seeing this argument not just being made by the people who signed this, but by pastors on Facebook. So it's very much current and being widely made.
Yes. Yeah. Well, aside from the fact that, as we've been saying all along, this is a complete misuse of the term pro-life because it fails to make the fundamental distinctions between intentional and unintentional harm and between killing and lesser harm, this claim, too, is at its very, very best extremely debatable. Biden's policies lean heavily toward socialism, and his running mate Kamala Harris is an outspoken advocate of socialist policies. But the lesson of history all over the world is that socialist economies not only produce less wealth than free market economies, but also get that wealth into fewer hands. President Trump's economic policy brought us some of the strongest economic growth this country has ever had, and it drove unemployment down to record low levels, especially for minorities, including African Americans and Hispanics. Real wages, real purchasing power rose more rapidly for people in the lower spectrum of income earners for the first time in over a decade, and rose faster than for people in the upper spectrum. And the experience with government-run healthcare, which Biden and Harris support, has been abysmal, with long delays for poor quality care. And as far as minimum wage is concerned, every economic study ever done of the impact of minimum wage laws has concluded that that they result in disemploying low-skilled workers. You will have an increase in average wages after that, but that's because so many low-skilled workers have lost their jobs because of it. It doesn't allow them to get onto the ladder upward in the first place by having a job in which they learn skills to be able to rise up. So the economic policies, hey, at the very, very best, they are extremely debatable. That doesn't put them anywhere near on the same level in terms of the ethics of public policy as abortion.
Kevin, you're totally right, and honestly, I'm just going to be really direct here. I think that for the people that have been in leadership positions in the evangelical world, who are now saying, and the Catholic world, who are now saying that you should vote for Biden, I think they're useful idiots in the way that other movements have used that term, where they are uncomfortable with the personality of this president. And so they decided to retrofit their positions into a different place. But it is impossible to do that in this moment. It's such a polarized moment, like it or not, it just is. And the polarized moment on the Biden side, unfortunately, is an extreme position. You have to be for abortion at all stages, and you have to be okay with every American, regardless of what their convictions are, paying for it. It's the most extreme position that you can possibly have. In politics, that's a gift. And in faith life, it's painful. But that pain has to be meted out. And honestly, I think we have to look. I've seen all the people that have written about this recently: John Piper, Mr. French. I've read all of what they have to say. It is shallow, and I can say this. Maybe you can't. It is so shallow. It so abandons the most fundamental human rights that we have in this country. And it abandons what I believe the founders thought would be the preservation of democracy, of a democratic republic. That there would be people that would speak into moments like this, that were people of faith, that would preserve, and they're not doing it. You are, thank God. That's why I'm here. And that's why I'm going to give you a donation.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'm just really grateful for you. And I really hope that your word goes everywhere and permeates the consciences of the country.
Thank you very much. Yeah. You know, there's another point that I'd like to raise. Biden, the pro-life Evangelicals for Biden statement lists, among other supposedly pro-life causes, racism. And that raises the issue of, you know, what has the Trump administration done that has implications for race relations in this country, and particularly for the well-being of minorities, racial minorities, African Americans and Hispanics and so on. Now, I could talk about why I think the Biden-Harris Democratic Party platform would be worse economically, slowing or reversing economic growth, raising unemployment, harming especially the poor. But I also think they make a big mistake when the authors of this statement said that ticket would be better on race. I believe that the democratic progressive woke movement is having the opposite effect from what its supporters say they want when it comes to race. I believe it's actually fanning the flames of racial conflict by calling for what would in effect become an endless cycle of retaliation carried on in the name of reconciliation that doesn't really reconcile. True reconciliation begins with repentance, not retribution and vengeance, and demanding my pound of flesh. That's just not going to bring about reconciliation. I can get a little more specific about Biden and Harris. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley, who voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, wrote a great article in August that demonstrates how inappropriate it was for Joe Biden, also in August, to send a tweet about Michael Brown's life being taken 6 years ago in Ferguson, Missouri, and linking that tragic incident to what he called systemic racism. In the midst of racially charged riots in cities across the country, Biden's tweet arguably helped fan the flames of racial tension, or at least helped rationalize destructive actions by essentially repeating the false narrative about the Michael Brown shooting. I'm quoting from Turley here. A hands up, don't shoot, and police officer as murderer of black people narrative that was debunked by the Obama-Biden Holder Justice Department in 2015. Hands up, don't shoot never happened, and no federal, state, or local charges were ever brought against Officer Darren Wilson because he had reasonable cause to believe Michael Brown's actions posed a threat to his life. Now, Turley also referenced a 2019 Kamala Harris tweet on this topic in which she referred to Michael Brown's death as murder, and an even more inflammatory tweet by Senator and fellow presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren. Now, this is more outrageous when you consider that Kamala Harris is a former prosecutor. She should know that the evidence in that case didn't warrant any such charge. Nonetheless, she effectively branded a police officer as a murderer, even though he'd been cleared of any wrongdoing by the Obama Justice Department and 2 successive Democratic county prosecutors in St. Louis County, Missouri. Now, this is part of a pattern of racially divisive or inappropriate statements by Biden, Harris, and other prominent Democrats. In 2012, Biden told African Americans in Danville, Virginia, that a Romney administration would put y'all back in chains. The recent shootings of 2 sheriff's deputies in California and 2 police officers in Louisville, Kentucky, were just a couple of the manifestations of the broad brush demonization of law enforcement officers. Biden and Harris have contributed to this demonization by magnifying a Ferguson narrative that they have to know, they must know, is false. And this kind of systemic opportunism is destructive and unbecoming of people who seek the highest offices in our nation. But to bring this back to the real focus tonight, there is also the issue of the fact that African Americans are aborted, their children are killed in their mother's wombs at a far higher rate than white Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans. The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger was a racist eugenicist who wanted to use her abortion clinics to pare back the Black population in America. She intentionally had her early clinics located in areas of high Black population demographics, and they continue today to be especially located in areas like that. And Biden and Harris are no friends to African Americans when it comes to abortion.
Yeah, that's right. And there is no greater sign. If there were systemic racism, that's where it would be. It is in the system. It's in the very design of Margaret Sanger's Planned Parenthood great empire that that the human weeds, the human underbrush, in her words, be cleared out. That there are more abortions among Black New Yorkers in Manhattan than there are live births. Communicates where the heart of this movement, this pro-abortion movement, is. It is not to affirm the lives of the women and their natural instincts and to build their lives up, who could never be built up on the broken bodies of other human beings. It's to clear out the weeds for the rest of us so that we can live a better life when they're out of the way, so that we can march through their broken bodies and have a beautiful life. So that definitely is the institutional racism that is, and I actually think it's so intrinsically connected to the conversations that we ought to be having right now, because Black Lives Matter aside, which I think it should be as an institution set aside, there is a lot of pain in the Black communities around this country. I'm very familiar with a lot of it, having grown up in that world, not Black, but now looking back and what segregation and integration looked like around that time, having conversations with the people that I grew up with. There is so much pain. And if we don't really address that in a truly fundamental and Christian way, and the healing of abortion in those communities that white hegemony inflicted upon them, then we will have a hard time moving out of this in a way that we want. So I think there's no question about what you said, that there's a beautiful movement that's being used for political ends, that in a week we will see what happens. But I actually think that the people in the Black communities around this country are a lot smarter. They see what abortion has done. They see that they don't like the burning down of their communities. They see what faith has done, and when it has been undone, what hasn't been done in their communities. And that is a great point of hope, especially if we overturn Roe versus Wade, and especially if we enact laws that save lives, and we get to the work of saving little precious boys and girls of all races, and what they can do to make their lives better and the lives of our nation.
Amen.
Yep.
Well, Marjorie,
Amen.
Thank you for joining us tonight on From the Stacks. If you'd like to make any closing comments, we'd love for you to do that. We'd also like for you to tell us how we can be praying for you and for the pro-life movement generally, and how our viewers can support the Susan B. Anthony list.
Well, I'm just going to tell you one thing, that I love what you do so much. And this conversation has so inspired me. It's not something that I ever get to do, to be honest. Like my husband, who knows you, connected us. I really believe in what you do, and I'd love for our group to support you financially, and so we will do that. And
well, thank you.
So we'll talk about that tomorrow, Megan and Cal. But so the other thing that I would just ask is that our personal family is very divided because we're so political. We've taken all the principles that we've been talking about today, and we're very divided. I never knew that would happen. And so I ask you to pray for my family and every family, because I talk to families now all the time that have been divided in this political environment. and that we find our way to God's purpose and why this would all have happened. There's got to be a reason that this has happened in the way that it has, meaning the polarization of so many communities and families. It's so biblical. And that there be a reason for that. So that would be for all the people in our Susan B. Anthony List world and your world, that would be my prayer.
And Marjorie, I would ask the same prayer.
Yeah.
We have some divisions in my family as well over the
Yeah.
same thing, and it's heartbreaking.
It is.
But I think really prayer is going to be the number one means that we have for addressing these problems.
Yeah, I mean, we know we know what we have. Just being who we are and being people that we are and praying for them. That's will be an oasis with His kingdom.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you staying with us over 8 o'clock Eastern time. I know we've gone a little late tonight. For those of you who are wondering why the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, which typically deals with issues of the environment and climate change, is talking about abortion, let me point you to our mission. We promote biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the poor, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is why we have this booklet, How Does the Creation Care Movement Threaten the Pro-Life Movement? To get that booklet, we are giving it away free to anyone who gives a donation of any size, but you do have to request it. So on the second page of the donation page, you can just write pro-life in the comments box, or you can send me an email, megan@cornwallalliance.org, and we will send that to you. Next week is Election Day. We will be watching the election returns with you, and we will not be doing this live stream. So if you're here, I'm sorry we won't be. But we will be back on November 10th with another great discussion. And if you miss us that much, you can rewatch all of these live streams, including this one. And we do hope that you will share it with your friends and your family. And we do hope that you will be in prayer about this election, about the pro-life movement, and about all of the division within families. Thanks for joining us.